Right. Well, I make it 8 o'clock, so it's time for this month's conversation. Welcome to this month's Adventurous. This month we're talking about the Great North Road with Steve Silk. I'm sure all of you got my email inviting you to this, which quoted the great Dorothy L. Sayers, who claimed that that there was nothing much north of the Great North Road. No, that was it. It didn't go anywhere in particular, and that all pubs are much of a muchness. And as I'm sure you'll agree, neither Steve nor I are going to agree with that. So, Steve, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for writing the book.
Thank you for having me. That's
okay. So in case folk haven't guessed, Steve is the Steve off of the telly. If you're a Look East viewer, I'm a Look North viewer. For me, it's like having Harry Gratian on. So I mean, I'm absolutely honoured.
No, look, let's sort that one out straight away. I'm one of the guys who writes the stuff for the Harry Gratian of this world. I used to be a front of house TV reporter in a previous century, but I have retreated behind a laptop ever since.
I do recall you appearing on my television, though, Steve. I have to say. I think you must have leaked in from when you were in the northeast somehow into Yorkshire. But so writing is a sideline, isn't it? It's not the main gig.
No, I am very much a working journalist and have been for 30 years. The difference, of course, when you're writing a book is that the scale and the ambition and frankly the length is massively different. And I think I'm a typical journalist in that I can knock off 300, 500, 800 words. I don't say no problem, but it's my day job. I kind of get vertigo over about 1,000 words. And that's what I had to conquer when I started writing books, which, as you say, is very much a sideline. But yeah, not every journalist likes writing. There are plenty of journalists who just like chasing the bad guys and finding out cool stuff and being nosy. And I hope I do some of that as well. But I've just always passionately loved the process of writing from a very young kid. So that's why, as I've got older, I've found this fantastic hobby that means I've been able to really, I hope, hone my skills and will continue to do so in the years ahead.
So was that your route into journalism then? Was it a love of stories and writing and English? Was it?
Well, actually, there are stories and there are stories, aren't there? I was actually incredibly bad at writing the kind of fairy tale stories that one had to do at primary school. I remember the sort of eureka moment for me was in my first year at high school, where they said, spend whatever it was, 500 words describing something that happened today. And I traveled in by train, and I happily spent the time describing Reading Station in glorious detail, and suddenly had that moment. I thought, I can do this, because I was always rubbish at the, there are fairies at the bottom of the garden stuff. But actually describing what was out there, I really enjoyed and discovered that I was half decent at. So yeah, that was the moment, aged about 12.
So did you have a teenage outlet for that? Was there a school paper or anything like that?
There wasn't as such, but I remember doing some kind of it was a 60-mile sponsored walk for, I think it might have been Crisis at Christmas. Does that still exist? And we did 30 miles over per day, and I won the competition for the best description of the 2 days walk. So yeah, that was a boost in confidence. But I didn't get into writing more regularly until a week's work experience on my local paper, and then as a student.
Ah. And then I guess the profession takes over, and you get into your career as a journalist. So when did you come back to the writing in a more, I mean, it's not quite a leisurely thing, but when did the pleasure and the hobby sort of side of it come
Well, relatively recently. I had, so in my 40s, I guess, The Great Northern Road is my third book. I've written two coffee table books. Here's the first one, called The Worryman's Way, which came out in 2006. And this is, I did the photos as well as the text for this, but it's quite, it's more a series of articles. It's about a unfashionable bit of the Norfolk Broads, and there are walks and there are trips you can do by canoe, etc., etc. So it's a bit about the church, it's a bit about the walk, it's a bit about the old boy who used to live down the road. So it was a really, really useful nursery slope for what I've come on to now. It was in that it got me out there, because what I do as a day job now is mostly asking reporters and cameramen to go out and do this, that, and the other, and then I sort of shape it into a program. I'm not frontline, as it were, in any sense in the day job anymore. So it was an absolute joy to get back out, because I guess basically I'm a frustrated reporter, TV reporter, newspaper reporter. I don't really mind at heart. So yes, it was gosh, 15 years or so ago now, since that process started happening.
But I guess there's so many transferable skills that come from being a journalist, of like you say, going out and interviewing people, digging out stories that you get to reapply back into writing the books.
Absolutely. And when I've spoken to other people who do this sort of stuff, some of them are absolutely terrified. That they're wonderful at the history and they're wonderful at the description, but ask them to go and talk to the old boy in the corner of the pub, and they struggle. Whereas that, to me, is second nature. I still occasionally bottle it, mind. Sometimes there's still that moment where you've still got to step into the unknown. I don't say I'm perfect in that regard, but yes, generally speaking, I know it's got to be done. I know that quotes are going to give anything I write more pace and more life and just a different perspective on things. So yeah, that's a pretty important skill, I guess.
And I think the lovely thing I always find about writers, particularly like you say, those who are willing to get the quote while they're out there and don't rely on lots of desk-based research, is it tends to lead to more living, more life, more stories to tell. The two things go together. You've got to live to be able to write, haven't you, really?
Yeah. And guess what? That doesn't just apply to writing, does it? I mean, we should all do that all the time anyway. And one of the key moments in the book is me crossing the imaginary north-south or south-north divide, where suddenly it all becomes a little bit more obvious and natural in any case. And I say this as a proud Southerner, but I genuinely relax more when I get up to, certainly to Yorkshire, and if certainly, your County Durhams and your Geordie land. It's just, you're just gonna have a chat with everyone, aren't you? Why the hell wouldn't you?
Absolutely, and I love that bit about the book. I loved all the bits, because about heading north and that quote that I have made quite a bit of mileage out of that there's not particularly anything at the end of the Great North Road, but it was. It's for us Northerners. It's a good validation of everything that we hold true and kind of view as ourselves as different to the South, because we're friendly and voluble and all that sort of stuff.
Well, let me just. I was a bit worried about that, because there are plenty of books out there, aren't there? And I've got some of them here, like Pies and Prejudice, and also by Stuart Maconie, Long Road from Jarrow, and the prerequisite for writing a book about the North seems to be you've got to be from the North. Ideally, you've got some quality working class roots to you, and you can then fearlessly go. I'm a middle class Southerner, and it was a little bit right. Here we go, guys. Let's see what happens. But I haven't taken any stick that I know about from that point of view. Obviously, I play my Newcastle University student card at all points I possibly can. But yeah, I seem to be getting away with it.
we take all comers. We're a very friendly lot, and
A broad church.
Like exactly, and like I say, it's good validation to hear that even southern folk go, oh, actually, they're all right, these northerns. We'll talk a bit about the differences that kind of become apparent as you go further north in a bit. But I wanted to ask about the cycling as well. So have you always been a mammal? Is it something that's new to you? Because obviously the previous books weren't by bike, whereas this one was. Was it the book came first, or the cycling came first?
That's a good question. I was a cyclist as a kid. I wouldn't have regarded myself as a cyclist. Just everyone was on the bike all the time. The idea of being given lifts like I do with my teenage girls just wouldn't have happened. You know, you just got on your bike and sorted it out. But then there was much as there was with the writing, really, there's a sort of curious 20-year gap where I don't seem to do anything apart from, you know, have a job and have kids and stuff. And then at about the same time as the Worryman's Way came along, I was getting back on a bike regularly. 2010, I remember, was when I got my first road bike, you know, in this sort of second chapter of my cycling life. And then it just sort of gradually built up from there. So yes, it's an important part of the impetus for the book is the fact that by 2016, 2017, I'm getting increasingly confident at long distances on the bike and was looking for a project. And I felt that the Great North Road, the 400-mile length of it, in theory, was there was still a bit of a sense of jeopardy in it, but was worth a pop.
So I've got to ask, and I don't do a huge amount of cycling myself, but I've got lots of cycling friends. So I've got to ask, how many bikes have you got?
Do you know about N+1?
Yes.
Well, for everyone else, you probably all know it, but it's where the number of bikes you've got, you always want 1 plus more is N, and you always want another one. So yes, okay, I've got to own up to having a pure road bike and a mountain bike, but the one that the Great North Road is ridden on is the one in the middle, Jamis Aurora, which is a tourer, which I describe as being slightly more sturdy. And in theory, you can get out to darkest Peru and you'll come back again, because it's even got the spike sitting there ready to go. And it's certainly done me proud. And I've had it 6 years now, and it has still not had a puncture with those tires that are on it. Schwalbe Marathon Plus.
Are you sponsored by them? You get that one in all the time.
I'm not sponsored by anyone. It's all part of the BBC, Tim. I can't do it, but they're just very good tires.
Well, I hope they give, if and when they eventually wear out or get a puncture, I hope they give you a discount on them, because you're doing a grand job of pumping their wares. That wasn't
very good
intended. Yeah, there we go. But I mean, it's kind of it's very much in vogue now, isn't it? The whole cycling thing, in a way that even it probably wasn't even when you first started getting back on the saddle. I mean, you must have felt that in the response to the book. Is that right?
Yes, well, I think there's two things there. First of all, yeah, you're right. 2010, I remember getting my actual. There was, what's it called? The cycle to work scheme had been just introduced, or I was worried it wouldn't continue at about 2009, 2010, which is why I went for it then, because it is free money, really. You know, you get a bike, get all the tax off it, spread it over 12 months, piece of cake. And I remember that the big next push for cycling was 2012, with Bradley Wiggins, with the Tour de France and with the Olympics. And that was when I noticed the first spike. I mean, of course, there will be cyclists who have done it for decades before me who would see me obviously as a complete latecomer to the party, but that's what I noticed 2012. And then of course the second part of that has been lockdown, that it was an absolute joy seeing so many people on the roads during 2020 and 2021, and you could quite often tell they were newcomers. You know, there were a lot of wobbly people out there, but I think I think that's now baked in, isn't it? Of course, we all go back to our cars to a certain extent, but I think the level of us on a bike now there's been a step change because of the aftermath of COVID, and long may that continue. So yes, I have seen a good few changes on those years. I still think that infrastructure-wise, we've still got quite a way to go, although you do see improvements wherever you look. I think probably the next 10 or 20 years will make what we've improved already will be knocked into a cocked hat by the rate of change that I think might well be about to hit us.
And you could certainly see that from the book. That as you went along, there were different places that embraced the cyclist or didn't. I remember Stevenage seemed to be a particular, in terms of cycle lanes and the like, that seemed to be a great spot for you. Whereas there were other places where you were taking your life in your hands, going down the side of some A road with a whole load of cars whizzing past 80 miles an hour.
And it is a worry, isn't it? And it is a risk. I felt it was an acceptable risk, and I mean, goodness knows you've had people who are doing proper adventures many times on here, so it's all in context. But I've been cycling in Oxford this weekend, and as you head west out of Oxford, there's a small bridge, and it says on there, "Please don't overtake cyclists on this bridge." And there was a lady on a bike, and I'm about 100 yards behind her, and sure enough, a car does exactly that. And there really is that much between the wing mirror and her right arm, and you just think, gosh, if that's millimeters, and she's over, and she could easily have a broken leg, just like that, because of so much, well, what do you call it? So much, so many car drivers not seeming to understand that we're there. And I'm afraid there are still rows that happen. We occasionally get, I go out cycling every Saturday morning with a bunch of lads, and it's unusual, but it does happen that we just get absolute abuse thrown at us simply because we're on our bikes. And we always make an effort to go single file. We're within our rights to say double, but we never do. We're always full of, we're obsequiously polite and friendly to people. But I'm afraid there are still some people out there that just don't like us one little bit.
It's really strange, isn't it? It is so strange. And it doesn't seem to be just an English thing, from all the cycle touring that we've featured from around the world. I mean, some places seem to be better and worse, but there just seems to be a certain person or type of person who loathes cyclists for no apparent reason. I guess they're just angry people who are looking to take that anger out on someone else. But yeah, you are pretty defenseless, aren't you? It's not a fair fight at all.
No, it's not a fair fight.
And were there any particular incidents where on the journey where that came close, where you felt it was a bit hairy?
A couple. It was only a couple. It's 11 days of full-on cycling, and what I thought would be 400 miles becoming almost 500 miles. So that's not bad. Once in Islington with a huge, great lorry and a boy racer near Darlington. So that's pretty good. I don't say I feared for my life on those occasions or anything like it, but they were close shaves where, in my view, the driver was pretty much deliberately wanting to scare. So that's not ideal, but only two.
Such a shame. Now, as you went on your journey, you took with you in sort of inverted commas that Charles Harper's books when he cycled up the Great North Road. Now, I mean, that must have been a completely different experience for him when he seemed to be there and we'll talk later on about the sort of history of the road, but he seemed to be there in a period where it had been depopulated. Really, it had sort of fallen out of use in between the coaching and then the era of the motor car.
I've got both his books here. They weren't with me virtually. They were with me definitely in the pannier to be referred to at regular intervals. Until I set about writing this book, I don't think I'd really appreciated that there was this period where roads were felt to be old-fashioned. We our generation, the motor car is so hardwired into our existence, isn't it, that we sort of forget that there was a time before the motor car. And okay, there were stagecoaches, but there was this bit in the middle where the railways took over and was seen to be the absolute future. And Harper's luck is that he just happens to catch, by virtue of his age, the last knockings of that deserted phase of our roads. So he thinks he's almost writing roads, the obituary of the Great North Road in what he's doing. And it's quite a sort of mournful, elegiac tone that he often writes in, because he just sees that there's another deserted coaching inn that's never going to be opened again. This square is far too big. Why on earth why haven't they built on this yet? Because it's obvious we don't need anywhere for the stagecoaches to do stagecoaches park? I'm not sure. The stagecoaches to stop a while. So because of that, he's wonderfully descriptive about stuff, and the power of which is all the more has all the more strength because of our perspective on it. So that's why he's so important. He's obviously important to me. Historic England agree with me, because he isn't just a writer. He has dozens of pen and ink illustrations within his books. And whilst Historic England normally only deals in this regard with photos, a photographic record of how Stevenage looked before the new town or whatever, they've made an exception with him because they think that his illustrations are so redolent of a time just before the, in their case, the development after the Second World War. He's obviously writing and sketching before that. So he has his, from that point of view, he has a place in history. By the way, he is determinedly of his time. There are some views occasionally that are wrong, you know, but most of the time when he's on, when he's talking about history and he's talking about what he can see now, he is a very, very erudite witness.
Well, I agree, because he cycles through the town where I grew up, which is called Ascot, just outside Doncaster. And I don't live there anymore. I didn't really like living there at the time. Bizarrely, it's come up in one way or another in several of our books. But I loved his description. Ascot, in a situation of great natural beauty amidst limestone rocks and lakes. Now he is kind of stretching that a bit, I'll be honest. And with the advantage of possessing medicinal springs, has been, like most Yorkshire villages, made hideous by its houses and cottages. Inconceivably ugly to those who've not seen what abominable places Yorkshire folk are capable of building and living in. I mean, he's right, I have to be honest. So he's nailed it. I loved it though. I honestly, I couldn't. It's not the only reason why I've chosen the book, but it was one of those delightful things where all of a sudden this place where I grew up lands in the book, and it's got this historic reference to it. And yeah, he wasn't far off the mark. It was a bit of a grim pit village. But it did. That and the history of it did make me think differently about this great big bloody road that passed through the town, that I had even heard of it called the Great North Road, but that had never really connected with me in any way that made any sense. It was just a road that went to Doncaster. So reading the book really brought it to life, and I guess you must have had that from lots of people who read the book or who you met along the way, who'd probably not really got what the road was and the significance of it, and then all of a sudden there's this chap going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to cycle all the way from here to Edinburgh," and they're like, "Oh, right, so that's where this road goes." Was that how it was? Was that the experience you found?
Yes. I mean, first of all, I think it's pretty extraordinary actually that name, the Great North Road, still, I mean, of course it would still exist, but still resonates. I mean, my excuse for writing the book when I did, or rather publishing it when I did, was that it's 100 years since the road stopped being called the Great North Road and started being called the A1. that's a century for that road name to die out. It would have been entirely reasonable if only a few very strange, historically minded people now wanted to call it, or even were aware that it was called the Great North Road. Now, I don't think I did when I was a student going up to Newcastle. So I can't tell you exactly when I first realized that the two were mostly the same thing. But wherever I went in my research, I wouldn't necessarily use the Great North Road to start with. I might just say, oh, I'm just doing a little bit of research on the history of the road here. Oh yeah, we're part of the Great North Road, you know, that now, you know, it wasn't the teenagers who were saying that, it was the nice old boy. But that's incredible, isn't it? And I think it's unique, really. I don't, there was the Bath Road was sort of known as the Great West Road a bit, but I don't really think that survives in the same way. Sorry to say lovely things to Northerners again, but there's something about that word North, isn't there, that just says it's just a bit more exciting, I think. So yes, it was the fact that the lure and the romance and the history and the fact that you don't, it's not called the Bath Road, it's not called the Edinburgh Road, it's not called the Newcastle Road, it just goes, it could go on forever, you know, it's just going north, was pretty integral to it all. I think I've only answered half of your question there, but I've forgotten what the other half of it was too.
It's all right, so have I, and it was a good answer. So let's move on. I should say, we've been waffling away. I've been having a lovely time. I should say that if anyone else has got any questions or any comments about the Great North Road, throw them into the chat. I'll pick them up and discuss them with Steve. It's just as much everyone else's conversation is ours. I've just got carried away because we were talking about Ascot and the Great North Road. So oh
well, look, Charlotte's there already.
There you go.
Hang on, I've just lost what you said, Charlotte. Hang on. How much research did you do before the trip compared to what you learned during your journey? That's an excellent question. And I'm still not sure I did it right, excuse me. I did about a year to 18 months worth of research in my spare time. The joke is always that my wife would be downstairs watching Holby City and I'd go upstairs into the spare room and I'd bash out another, you know, half an hour of notes on whatever it was. This is how many books worth of research I did. Most of them are A5, but there are a couple of A4. I got to sort of 7 books full of notes. I don't know if I always use them. I don't know if it's the best way of doing it, but it's the way that I like to just get the process of changing something that's on someone else's page into my page and the notes around it. I just have to write it down. I always had to revise like that. I could never just read it and it go in. It has to be written down with my own fair hand. So I did do quite a lot of research, and I thought that I'd done enough research, at least in the southern half of the road, which is easier to get to from where I live in Norfolk. I mean, nothing's easy to get to from Norfolk, let me tell you, but relatively speaking, I could go from London up to maybe Newark and get back in a day, no problem. But the trouble is that once you're on a bike and once you stop and you talk to people and once you're actually doing the journey day in, day out, you just tune in better. So afterwards, there was a lot of research I had to do after the journey had actually been done, to do justice to it, really, to do justice to the southern half of it, and in some extent just keep going back to the northern half for bits that, you know, maybe the museum had been closed or whatever it was. So I'm still not sure which way round is best. I'm still not sure if one should just go for it and have the pure adventure of the road and not having never been to Boroughbridge or whatever before, and then go back for a number of recce trips afterwards, or the other way round, because if you do it the other way round and you do your research, then you can know that you really should divert to this little pub because it's amazing on whatever it is. Thoughts and ideas accepted on that?
I think it must have been a really interesting experience to sort of soak up so much knowledge. I mean, a year to 18 months, that's a lot of time digging into. I bet you bored your friends rigid with stories.
No, they've put me in my place. I shut up about
it. But then it must have been wonderful to actually be out there and coming across these places that you read about. I can imagine that sort of, oh, I read about this place and this is what it looks like.
And there's certainly, I do say this in the book, so forgive me, but everywhere's better if you arrive by bike. And that's, I think, again, I try to take that into life generally as a result of that. But the fact that you've had to earn the right to get there under your own steam is so just makes you see things through different eyes, through clearer eyes. Everything's just a bit brighter. There's a better filter on the world if you've turned up under your own steam. I really believe that. And I do try and do that with, if I'm going swimming at the local Lido here these days, which is about 5 or 8 miles away, I try to cycle. It's just better if you do that.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that we hear a lot actually, about that, taking your time to get somewhere and the journey being part of it. It makes it, it definitely makes it really powerful. And I also loved that you were reflecting how long it took you to get into the experience. And I think you said it took you about 3 days to really get into the rhythm of being on the road and getting up in the morning and all that sort of stuff. And then you were sort of in your cycling bubble.
Yes, I think it did take 3 days. I think when I do my next one, I'll try to learn from that though, because I think you've got to get into it as soon as you can. First of all, how often do any of, I mean, this is quite indulgent stuff I'm doing here, isn't it? I'm just abandoning the family. I'm just going to do what the hell I like for, in this case, 11 days. So, that's a bit of privilege there in the first place, isn't it? To have the secure job and to have the time and to have a few quid. I mean, not that I was able to stay in all the coaching inns, mind. It was a bit more of a sort of Travelodge and Airbnb kind of journey. But it's a privilege. Go for it. Throw yourself into it. Certainly by the end of it, I was thinking I could go on and do this forever. I mean, that's having had a bit of a dip in terms of, oh my God, am I going to make this? Everything aches on about day 5 or 6. When we stormed into Edinburgh, I was thinking, yeah, come on, Inverness, here we come. The body does adapt frighteningly quickly. And I am no kind of sportsman, let me tell you. I am not the kind of guy who was first pick in the football team or anything like that. But if you do a bit of practice and keep plodding on, you do get better. And the body does say, yeah, go on then. We'll do a bit more.
Yeah, and I definitely got that sense at the end that you could certainly have carried on. And I think there's an interesting physiology there, isn't there? Which is probably that we're not really designed for these sort of sedentary lifestyles, and we probably are designed to be much more active than our environment gives us the opportunity to be. And that's, I definitely think there's a physicality that the body responds to in things like cycle touring or long distance walking and things like that we're kind of attuned to that. We're used to doing that sort of physicality.
Yeah, and I'll just a sort of bit under the bonnet. I was encouraged to put more of that in when I signed with Summersdale, who have been fantastic throughout, by the way, as a publisher. You get given an editor, and the editor has a look at the script and says that he likes this and doesn't like that. And he just encouraged me to put a bit more of that in there, which interestingly I had written in my diary that I was taking at the time. It was there, but I didn't quite feel that, or didn't have the confidence to, I don't know, feel that it was going to be interesting to people. Whereas he was, no, I want to know how you feel. What have you got? What more can you tell me on that day? So again, that was a good learning experience for me. That's very much part of it. I think I was probably a little bit more, come on, let's get on with the journey. Let's tell the next story. But he wanted a bit more of me in it.
It's fascinating, and it's funny actually that the last author, Annabelle Abbs, that we interviewed, had exactly the opposite experience, and she had loads of that in her book, the science of it and the physicality. And in the end, her editor told her to take it all out, and she wrote a completely separate book, and ended up one was the stories, and one was sort of the science. So I guess it depends. It depends on your editor. Did you enjoy that process then? Did you enjoy the back and forth with the editor? Is that?
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I mean, first of all, this book very nearly didn't get published because I started pitching it to people at what became the worst days of the pandemic. I pitched it in January of 2020 because I wanted, the aim was to give it the peg of being 2021 to tie in with the 100th anniversary. So I thought, right, aren't I being organized? I'm giving these publishers a year to get all the physical side of things sorted out. But then it just fell into this black hole of COVID, and no one wanted to touch it. And I remember speaking to someone from AA Publishing who said he thought that the travel book was dead and it was never going to come back, and he kind of liked it, but he wasn't sure he even had a job anymore. And it was, as we all know, in our different walks of life, it was a terrible time. And I thought by May, June 2020, I'd kind of given up on the fact this book would ever come out, and was thinking, well, why don't I go and do a writer's course, learn to do this thing properly, which, by the way, Norwich is fantastic at. Is the National Centre of Writing is in Norwich, down the road from me here. So that would have been hours of fun, I'm sure, a few quid as well. And then I pitched it again to Summersdale in the July, and they said, hey, we love it, great, come and work with us. And off I went with Charlie, who just, it was a fantastic experience. It was detailed, there were 300 notes on my, that's almost one a page, isn't it? Of things that, they weren't all criticisms, but some of them were great, and some of them were don't understand, or flesh this out, or why don't you connect that with that? I couldn't wait to get started on it, really. And again, maybe that's a journalist thing. I mean, of my era, I'm used to newsrooms in the 80s and the 90s in the northeast of England, where I would be told in no uncertain terms how crap my copy was. Sort it out, you got 10 minutes as a deadline. So I don't mind, I'm not precious about it from that point of view. And I did, so that's one thing, I'm not precious about it. Two, he was always right. The things he was saying, you think, oh God, yeah, why didn't I think of that? So yeah, no, I just learned a lot from it. I that's what I've always wanted, really. I mean, that didn't really happen with Worryman's Way and my other book, but it certainly did with this one.
There's a great comment from Andrew in the chat
Hi,
there.
Andrew.
300 notes is getting off lightly. You must have been doing something right.
That's really important context. I have no idea.
Brilliant.
326.
I think it worked brilliant. I said to everyone in the letter that I wrote, I read 3 different cycle touring books, and one was one of those cycle tourists around the world, all that sort of stuff, and it just felt too, aren't I amazing, look at this thing that I've done. There was another one that was a good book, it was a really good book, and I was very tempted with it, and there were lots of clever insights. And then I read yours, and it was just beautiful, and it flowed. And I'll tell you who it reminded me of. It reminded me of Bill Bryson.
Oh my God! Thank you so much. Wow, I'll take that.
You were outside Stamford, and you were wistfully eating a Twix. And I thought, that's bloody Bryson. That's. So how do you? I feel I should be passing the questions over to Andrew at this point as an editor. But how do you? How did you find your voice? Who inspired you? Who do you want to write like?
How I write is that I get something down, and it's not much good, but it's down, and about half an hour later, I go through it again and swear at it and get rid of half of it and start again. And it really goes through about 7 or 8 of those stages over often months. before it even get to the stage where something that I would want to submit. So that's the first thing. I've got a load of these travel books here that I'm one of those people that if you go to the Waterstones British travel table, which is the high altar in my view, I've kind of read a lot of them. I really like Alistair Moffat, who writes mostly north of the border. I mean, Simon Armitage, oh my God. I mean, he just writes, it's just, well, I was about to say a really stupid thing. It's poetic. Of course it's poetic with him. Though I would say that Armitage and Maconie are the big two for me. There's, what's the other one I was going to mention? The first book, I mean, this genre has, in my view, has expanded massively over the last 10 or 15 years. The first one I can remember loving was A303. Sorry, Tim, it's very much a Southerner's book. And that was the one, and he's a BBC journalist, actually, Tom Ford, and he's written others as well, Channel Shore. So I felt reasonably confident there was a market out there, and I was reasonably confident that I knew my market and knew the genre. And by the way, all our books look exactly the same. There's always a bit of, look, there's always blue at the top. That's where you put the title, something in the foreground and a bit of green in the middle. That's, I know if a book looks like that, I know that I'm halfway to probably liking it. But Tim, I don't have a great answer to finding my voice. I think probably I'm still finding it, if I'm honest, because as I say, this is my first book where I was even allowed to have a voice.
Well, I think it's great, and if as you say you're kind of developing it, then well, I look forward to it developing. But it's there was a lovely comment in the book about maps are there to be read as novels as well, and as a geographer, that really spoke to me. I was like, yeah, that's absolutely right, because I've certainly got a habit of all the books that I read. I always dig out the map, typically an OS map. I do sometimes use the app on my phone because I don't have the entire country in OS maps, but I'll try and follow it. But I loved that you've obviously got a love for maps, and that you were out there with paper maps as well. This wasn't some digital thing. This is you with a big bit of paper flapping at the side of an A road.
Yeah, and I'm always happy doing that. And as I say, I genuinely enjoy, reading a map. And as an aside, I occasionally do some stuff with my kids' old school on D of E bronze. And the sight of the average 15-year-old looking at an OS map is gladdens my heart, but is also hilarious sometimes, because of course they haven't. Why on earth would they have a clue what to do with it? I mean, sadly, it's getting to the stage where I feel they don't know what to do with a newspaper either, which is a newspaper journalist for years also it is sad for me. But yes, I did that. But you know that my mate Dave joins me for the last 3 days. Dave is 10 years younger than me, and 2, just not as much of an old history bore as me. So there was a bit of a sort of battle, because I'd be flapping around with this thing and he'd be going straight to Google Maps and sometimes nailing it more quickly than I would. But hey, he didn't know that there was a church with a spire in the next village, did he? And that's what you really need to know.
Brilliant. The D&V goal does make me laugh, mainly because I've got to take a whole group of scouts camping this weekend, and we're going for a hike over Ilkley Moor. And yeah, it's gonna be interesting, put it that way.
But isn't it great? Honestly, I have so much fun when I do that. I haven't done it for a year, but those kids get so much out of it. And often what I particularly like about it is it's quite often the kids that didn't think they were going to be good at it, or aren't good academically, or aren't good whatever else it is, that suddenly find a niche, and you're just hoping that you're opening up something for the rest of their lives there. That's the genius of D of E.
Yeah, no,
I've just noticed there are 5 chats here. Should we have a look at those? Or
I think we've got most of. Well,
oh,
Tracy,
you've done them, have you? Sorry, I haven't been able to look at them.
She says that you found your voice and that she devoured the book in a day and couldn't put it down and is looking forward to the next. And I always think that
you, Tracy.
if someone reads a book in a day, there's something good in that there, isn't there? You know, none of us are racing through books that don't set us alight. So I think it's.
And the other thing that Andrew's just said about Rob Cohen writing a book about the Great North Road, yeah, I do know about that, and it's probably going to be, and he's walking it, I believe, Andrew, isn't he? I think, does he always walk it? I haven't read any of his books. I know I should do. I've seen them on the shelves many times. So yeah, I suppose from that point of view, I mean, he's a big name, isn't he? I've got to flog this book for all it's worth by late 2024, I think.
There might be some coattails to ride on there as well.
Yes, yeah, that's the other way of looking at it, isn't it?
No, but I didn't know that either, Andrew. So thank you. I always like a bit of insider tips.
Thank you for the other kind comments on here, by the
way. We talked before about the history of it and the speed of travel and stuff like that. You obviously did a lot of research on the coach industry, and I didn't even realise that there were different passenger coaches and mail coaches. Did they all travel about the same speed? How long would it have taken someone to get from London to Edinburgh then? Was it comparable with yours, or were they going slower or faster, or what?
They would have been going slightly, I think it would have averaged out at about the same, maybe slightly slower than I did. It depends which stage. I mean, the great years of coaching are 1780 to 1830, 1840, depending on when the local railway first turned up. And there were massive changes and improvements during that time. I think I loosely say my average was 14 miles an hour, very roughly. I think you could always rely on them going 10 miles an hour as a mail coach, sometimes faster. Stage coaches and mail coaches would like to race, and that could end in accidents. So there was always this bit of a sense of competition. The mail coaches also took people, but their raison d'etre was the mail. That was why they were established, first of all, on the London to Bristol run, and then quickly to everywhere else in the country. And there was a sense in which the fact that there were these mail coaches which drove innovation within coaching engineering, so to speak, and the fact you had the turnpikes improving the roads and maybe slicing through hills so that they weren't as steep to make them faster because the horses could go up and quicker, or widening the roads or whatever it was. Those two developments were very complementary to each other, so that the speed they would go at in, say, 1786, when things had really got going, versus 1830, there were things got better and better as they went on.
And who would get a stagecoach then? Who was travelling the distance? I mean, obviously not everyone would be going from London to Edinburgh, but Leeds to Newcastle or Grantham.
It was still an expensive business, so not most people stayed local for most of the time. So you're talking about at least middle class to upper middle class people were the only people that would make those journeys. And there was, well, at least initially, there was less need. We all lived such incredibly local lives in those days that it was perhaps business people and politicians that were amongst others that were on the move. It still was a pretty niche market. Witness the fact that you only had a few people inside, and then famously people on the outsides. It was, this was nothing compared to the scale offered by railway carriages when they came along midway through the 19th century.
I suppose you get a sense of that sort of class of the passenger from your great tale of the guy who leaves his purse in the pub. I think it was somewhere I think it might have been Ferrybridge, and the guy from the pub chases after him. I mean, and gets shot for his trouble.
Yes, Gervais the tapster, poor guy. So the lord of the manor is the lord. A lord was travelling back from his honeymoon in Scotland, and then he leaves his purse at Ferrybridge, and then the tapster races after him on a horse to say, "Your purse, sir, your purse," trying to give it back to him. He thinks it's a highwayman, shoots him, and I have a little dally into class war there, don't I, by quoting the guy who says, because he gets let off pretty much, it's seen as self-defense, but would it have been seen as self-defense had the tapster shot the lord? We doubt it, don't we? So yes, that's exactly that. That would be a typical passenger, would be a very well-to-do landed gentry type who perhaps had interests in different parts of the country. It wouldn't have been the likes of you and I, really.
No, but how back to the research thing, how on earth did you dig out that story? How did that come to you?
That story came to me with the help of my sister, who is actually much more qualified as a historian than I am, and loves going through old newspaper cuttings, although these days they're electronic. So I gave her the job of finding me out interesting stuff about the Great North Road. So she just went in on Great North Road as a search tool, and up it popped. I think it might have come to me. I think I might have had some suggestion that there was something out there first of all, but the actual newspaper article from the Leeds Intelligencer came to me from her. That's how I got it. And I'm a sucker for all that. I love reading those. Again, of course, it's my trade, isn't it? How journalists did their job 200 odd years ago is fascinating.
Absolutely.
And of course, a vital historical record.
Yeah. And these are the things that bring those times to life. And I really got a sense that the book did that, because as I was, I went out on a little ride with a friend round Borough Bridge to record a bit from the book, and we were cycling along, and I did find that I was looking out for the coaching inns, I was looking at the archways into the courtyard, and all of a sudden you realise what the function of that was at the time. In a way that had completely passed me by, and these places must have been absolutely a bustle. I mean, with people coming and going, and there must have been a roaring trade around serving and looking after these people, and ensuring that horses are fed and watered, and so are the passengers, and everything moves on.
And that's why this idea, whether it gets off the ground or not, I don't know, that Beamish Museum in County Durham will recreate a genuine, it will recreate a coaching inn, complete, I would hope, with horses and an ostler and a landlord and someone playing the Northumbrian pipes in the corner, etc., etc. That would, and you were able to stay the night. It's going to be a genuine inn, not just something to gawp at and then go home again. I mean, that really takes it to another level, doesn't it? And I don't think any of us will quite work out how we feel about things until you're able to really immerse yourself so physically into it. I've never sat in a mail coach, for example. I've sort of poured at one across a gate in the village of Tuxford in Nottinghamshire, but I've yet to sit in one. I've seen one or two in other museums as well, but I don't think, wouldn't it be great to actually sit on the top and realize exactly how far off the ground you are, and if that's going at 15 miles an hour at a gallop, how secure are you? That's the kind of stuff that would really give all of us a genuine insight, I think.
A terrifying insight.
Yes, I suspect so.
Yeah.
Yes,
but yeah, it takes you into it, and it's that was the thing that made me think that I thought about the book, is that it's not that long ago. we think that things have always been as they are, but it's really books like this that really remind us that things change ever so quickly, and it's only just out of, you know, Harper's travels are only just out of living memory, aren't they, really?
Well, one thing that I think is fascinating now is that these coach passengers would, let's say they would arrive at the George in Stamford, and they would be given half an hour or perhaps less than that to have their meal, and then they would go again. So they would get a tiny sense of that this place called Stamford, and then they're off. Well, I haven't got an electric car, but some of my friends are now getting electric cars. They are now needing to spend half an hour or 40 minutes in the modern equivalent of a coaching inn, whilst their car gets charged much as a horse would get fed. And it's almost as if we're going backwards, but backwards in a good way there, that you're going to have to spend more time in a place because filling up takes 2 minutes, charging takes a lot longer. And I wonder where that's going to lead to. I wonder where we're going to be in 10 years on that. Perhaps just superchargers and it all happens super quickly, or maybe we just encourage to have the coffee. Maybe that it'll in some way boost town centres. That's probably too much to hope for. But do you see what I mean? It's another big change is right upon us now.
It's all about the relationship between society and the technology of its age and how it shapes it. I think it's fascinating, but we never really lift the hood on it until someone gives you a prod and says, this is how it used to be. It's not like this anymore. This is why it was. There's a great question from Andrew, who said, are you finding that the Road West still has an identity in the way that the Great North Road had?
Yes, to explain, I'm looking at doing the A40, which goes through the Chilterns, Oxford, Cotswolds, Wye Valley. I don't think I can answer that question yet because I haven't cycled it properly. I'm just dipping in and out. I suspect not, in that it doesn't have an overarching name. I had to explain it there, didn't I? I never have to explain the Great North Road. It's just there. So I think, I suspect it will have, the book will end up, if it gets published, will end up having a slightly different flavor, because I can't quite rely on that overall sense of romance. Although Harper has written about it. I have his 2 very chunky volumes, what he calls the Oxford, Gloucester and Milford Haven Road is what he calls it. And again, it was chunky enough for him to have to go to 2 volumes, as he did for the Great North Road. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. I can't give you a definitive answer yet, but I'm going to enjoy finding out.
I'm loving the glimpses into your library, Steve. What a great collection of books you've got there. You must be like me and find. In fact, I was going to say you must find your shelves overflowing. But look at those immaculate shelves behind you. There isn't a single book slotted in on top at all.
It's not that they're all over there. There's another one. But look, I can't resist. I'm going to show you another book. Look at this whopper. This is,
wow.
What is this? A1, is it? I don't know. But it's called Coaching Days of England. I bought it in a charity shop for 20 quid, knocked them down from 25 quid. Is that allowed in a charity shop? Am I really mad, really mean person? In Pickering, North Yorkshire, about 3 weeks ago. And it is the most detailed, exquisite, indulgent book on the days of coaching you could possibly hope for. It was published in 1966. They said it was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the last ever coach somewhere obscure. And they really went to town on it. So yeah, that one's not getting on any shelf at the moment. That one has to slide under the sofa.
So come on, obviously the coaching in was a regular staging point. So where was your best stop in a coaching in? Which, and I know you're talking the book about the ones you like, and maybe it was one of those, because some of them are very evocative of times gone by. But I'm sure there were a couple where you just stopped in and you really needed that coffee and a slice of cake or whatever. So which one was your favorite coaching on the way there?
The Golden Line in Northallerton, I think, edges it. There are a number that are right up there. That are in my Premier League. But in terms of, yes, as you say, my personal needs, it was a Sunday. It'd been a bit of a ropey day. I hadn't cycled that far, but I felt like I'd cycled about twice as far as I actually had. And this inn was genuinely welcoming to me as a pilgrim of the road, he says, being slightly pompous. There was no sense that this place was, oh, we're a bit of a tourist attraction, we're the posh pub, of course you want to stay here. It was much more a sense of, come on in. Oh, you got a bike, have you? Yeah, right, we'll sort that out. That's going to go in the boiler room. Oi, such and such, can you help this fellow with, they just really looked after me, so much so that I just decided that I wasn't going to stay there. I was just going to have lunch there, but I just thought, right, this is the place for me. So that sense of being looked after, that sense in the Islamic world where the traveler is a sort of honored guest sort of thing. That's pushing it a bit, but not much. That's how I felt in Northallerton. I can give it no higher praise than that, I think.
That pleases me immensely to hear. I know it well. I've had many a buffet in there. I used to work in Northallerton, so I'm so pleased to hear that. Well, there we go. Our hour is up. Steve, thank you so much. What a great conversation. What a great book. It was everything that I want to find in a book, because we read so many of this genre that I try and find different ways of taking people into a little escapism. But that doesn't mean cycling all the way around. It doesn't mean climbing the highest mountain. Sometimes it can mean just following this historic whimsy and meeting some people along the way and uncovering some stories along the way. And I think that's what the book does absolutely beautifully. So thank you for it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a really good time, and thank you for your kind words with your review as well, which are much appreciated, and went straight on Twitter. It's lovely speaking to people who obviously share the same interests and love that I have, and I'm pleased that it seems to have gone down well, and I'm really chuffed with that. Thank you so much.
Oh no, it's been brilliant. Right, I'm going to take us both off pin, and we can all do the goodbye thing. Let's take Steve off pin. Right, brilliant. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for the editorial insight, Andrew. We'll be coming to you again. It's been fab. I'm so glad you joined us. Next month's conversation, if you've had a letter about next month's book already, it's not the 16th of July. It's Sunday, the 20th of July. And you'll know who that's with if you know who it's with, and if you don't know who it's with, well, the books are going to be coming out just after the bank holiday, so you'll pretty soon find out. If you're waiting for a next set of books, the next two are absolute stonkers. I mean, they're all good, aren't they? But honestly, it's so tempting to give you some clues, but I can't. I'm not going. That's it. Lips are sealed. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We'll do it all again in about a month's time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.